There's a strange rule people whisper about in this city. A rule most people laugh at, until it's too late. They say that after 3 in the morning, the streets don't belong entirely to the living anymore. Sometimes, an old taxi appears out of nowhere, stopping beside people who are alone. The driver rarely speaks. The ride always begins normally. But once the door closes behind you, you may realize the destination was never meant for the living. Tonight's story is called Never Take a Taxi After 3 a.m. Chapter 1. The City After 3 a.m. There is something unsettling about a city after 3 in the morning. It is not the peaceful, quiet people imagine when they think of late-night streets. It is a different kind of silence, one that feels heavy, almost alive, the kind of silence that makes you look over your shoulder even when no one is there. Nam stepped out of the bar and pulled his jacket tighter around himself. The night air was damp and cold after a brief rain. The pavement reflected the pale yellow glow of street lights, stretching across the empty road like thin pools of light. Most of the city had already gone to sleep. The laughter, music, and chatter from inside the bar faded as the door closed behind him. Now all that remained was the distant hum of electricity from the street lamps and the faint rustling of wind through the narrow alley nearby. Nam checked his phone. 3:02 a.m. He sighed and opened the ride-hailing app. The screen refreshed again and again, but no drivers were available. It wasn't surprising. Very few people wanted to drive at this hour. He rubbed his temples, still slightly dizzy from the drinks. Great, he muttered under his breath. The street felt strangely empty. Too empty. Across the road, a convenience store flickered with fluorescent light. But even that place looked abandoned. The clerk inside sat slumped behind the counter, half asleep. Nam stepped closer to the curb and looked down the long, silent street. That was when he saw it. A pair of headlights slowly emerged from the fog at the far end of the road. The car approached at a calm, steady pace until it finally stopped right in front of him. A taxi. But something about it looked old. The silver paint had faded into a dull gray. Small scratches covered the doors, and the roof sign flickered weakly, as if the bulb inside was dying. The engine idled quietly. For a moment, the driver didn't move. Then, slowly, the passenger door unlocked with a soft click. Nam leaned down slightly to look through the window. The driver sat perfectly still behind the wheel. His face was hidden in shadow beneath the dim dashboard light. "Taxi?" Nam asked. No answer. Just silence. For a few seconds, Nam hesitated. A strange feeling crept up his spine, like the faint touch of cold fingers. But it was late. He was tired, and he just wanted to go home. Nam pulled the door open and climbed into the back seat. The moment the door shut behind him, the taxi pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the empty street. Nam had no idea that this would be the last normal moment of his life. Chapter 2. The driver who never looked in the mirror. The taxi moved quietly through the empty streets. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. Nam leaned back in the seat, still feeling the lingering warmth of alcohol in his body. The inside of the taxi smelled faintly of old leather and something else he couldn't quite identify, a damp, earthy scent, like wet soil after rain. Street lights slid across the windows one after another, casting brief flashes of pale light inside the car. Nam cleared his throat. "Can you take me to Riverside Apartments?" he asked. The driver gave a slow nod. Still, he said nothing. Nam frowned slightly. Most taxi drivers like to talk, asking questions, complaining about traffic, or chatting about the city. But this man didn't seem interested in conversation at all. His hands remained steady on the steering wheel. His eyes focused straight ahead. Nam shifted in his seat and glanced toward the front. That was when he noticed something strange. The driver never looked at the rearview mirror. Not once. Most drivers checked it constantly, especially late at night with unfamiliar passengers. But this man drove as if the back seat didn't exist. Nam leaned forward slightly. "Busy night?" he tried again. No response. The only sound inside the taxi was the low rumble of the engine and the soft hiss of tires moving over wet pavement. Nam let out a small, awkward laugh. "Guess not." He leaned back again, staring out the window. The city outside looked different at this hour. Buildings stood like dark silhouettes against the sky, and most windows were completely black. Traffic lights blinked lazily over empty intersections. After a moment, Nam's eyes drifted toward the rearview mirror. At first, he was just looking absent-mindedly. But then his body stiffened. Something wasn't right. The mirror reflected the backseat clearly. It showed Nam sitting there. It showed the dark interior of the taxi. But it did not show the driver's face. Nam blinked. Maybe the angle was strange. He leaned slightly to the left. The mirror shifted with his movement. Yet the reflection remained the same. Where the driver's face should have been, there was only shadow. A thick, unnatural darkness that swallowed the space where his reflection should be. Nam's stomach tightened. Slowly, he raised his eyes toward the driver again. The man continued driving. Calm, silent, unmoving, and still. He never once looked into the mirror.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Road That Wasn't on the Map. Nam tried to convince himself that what he had seen in the mirror meant nothing. Maybe the angle had been strange. Maybe the lighting inside the taxi was too dim. Still, the uneasy feeling in his chest refused to go away. Outside the window, the city continued to drift by slowly, dark buildings, empty sidewalks, and the occasional flickering streetlight. Nam glanced down at his phone again. The map application was still open. A small blue line showed the route to his apartment. Everything looked normal. But something about the road outside didn't match what he saw on the screen. The taxi turned left at an intersection. Nam frowned. That wasn't the way home. He leaned forward slightly. "Hey, I think you missed the turn," Nam said. The driver didn't respond. The taxi continued moving. Another block passed. Then another. Nam looked outside more carefully now. The familiar shops and restaurants he expected to see were gone. In their place stood rows of narrow buildings with dark windows and peeling walls. None of the signs were lit. None of the streets looked familiar. It felt like they had entered a completely different part of the city. Nam checked the map again. According to the screen, they were still on the correct route. But the world outside told a different story. "Excuse me," Nam said, his voice slightly firmer now. "Are you sure this is the right way?" For a few seconds, the driver remained silent. Then, slowly, he spoke. "Yes." Just one word. His voice was low and rough, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. Nam swallowed. Something about the way the man said it made the air inside the taxi feel colder. The car drove deeper into the unfamiliar streets. The streetlights grew farther apart. The buildings became older, darker. And eventually, Nam noticed something that made his skin crawl. There were no other cars. Not a single one. No headlights. No parked vehicles. Nothing. It was as if the entire city had disappeared, leaving only this lonely road and the taxi moving through it. Nam's phone suddenly vibrated in his hand. He looked down. The GPS signal flickered. The blue dot representing his location jumped wildly across the screen, before freezing completely. Then a message appeared. "Location not found." Nam slowly looked up. Outside the window, the road ahead stretched into a thick layer of fog. And the taxi began to accelerate. Chapter 4. 3:17 a.m. Nam tightened his grip on the phone as the taxi sped deeper into the fog. The road ahead was barely visible now. The headlights cut through the mist in two pale beams. But everything beyond them disappeared into a thick gray wall. The city lights were gone. No buildings. No traffic signals. No people. Just the road and the endless fog. Nam's heart began to beat faster. He glanced at the driver again, hoping the man would slow down or say something. But the driver remained completely calm, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed forward, almost too steady, as if he had driven this road many times before. Nam swallowed and looked back down at his phone. The GPS was still frozen. No signal. No route. Just a blank map. He opened the clock app instead. The screen glowed faintly in the darkness. 3:17 a.m. The number made a cold shiver crawl up his spine. Nam didn't know why, but something about that exact time felt wrong. Then he remembered. A conversation from years ago. Back when he was still in college. Some friends had talked about strange urban legends in the city. Stories that people liked to tell after drinking late at night. Most of them were stupid. Ghosts in abandoned hospitals. Shadow figures in old subway tunnels. But there was one story Nam had never forgotten. It was about taxis. The legend said that after 3 a.m., some taxis no longer belonged to the living. They appeared on empty streets, picking up passengers who were alone. And once someone got inside, the ride didn't end where they expected. Nam forced a small laugh under his breath. "Just stupid stories," he muttered. Yet the uneasiness in his chest grew stronger. Suddenly, the taxi slowed. Then it stopped completely. The engine continued to hum quietly. Nam looked out the window. At first, all he saw was fog. Then shapes slowly emerged from the mist. Tall stone pillars, iron gates, and rows upon rows of dark shapes stretching into the distance. Nam's blood ran cold. It was a cemetery. An old one. The kind that had probably been there for 100 years. Nam turned toward the driver. "Why did we stop here?" The driver didn't answer. For a long moment, he simply sat there. Then, very slowly, the rear door behind Nam clicked open. Nam frowned and turned slightly. But the moment he looked toward the back seat, his heart nearly stopped. Someone was sitting there. A woman, dressed in white. Her long black hair hung forward, covering her face. Nam was certain of one thing. When he entered the taxi, the back seat had been empty.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Second Passenger. For a moment, Nam couldn't breathe. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. When he had gotten into the taxi, the back seat had been completely empty. He was certain of it. The interior light had briefly flickered on when he opened the door, and he had clearly seen the worn leather seats behind him. There had been no one there. But now, someone was sitting directly behind him. A woman. She sat perfectly still, her posture straight and unnatural. Her long black hair fell forward, hiding her face like a dark curtain. Nam slowly turned his head forward again, his heart hammering in his chest. Maybe she had entered when the taxi stopped. Maybe he just hadn't noticed. Yes, that had to be it. But something still didn't feel right. Nam hadn't heard a door open. He hadn't heard footsteps. And the driver hadn't reacted at all. It was as if the woman's presence meant nothing. Nam swallowed and forced himself to speak. Hello?" The woman didn't answer. The air inside the taxi suddenly felt colder. Nam could feel it on the back of his neck, like the faint breath of someone standing too close. The engine started again. Without a word, the driver pressed the accelerator, and the taxi slowly pulled away from the cemetery gates. No one had asked where the woman wanted to go. No one had said anything at all. For several long seconds, the only sound inside the car was the low vibration of the engine. Then, the woman spoke. Her voice was soft, barely louder than a whisper. "Did you get in after 3?" Nam froze. "What?" The woman repeated the question, her voice calm and strangely distant. "Did you get into this taxi after 3 in the morning?" Nam hesitated. "Yes." Silence filled the taxi again. Then the woman let out a quiet, hollow laugh. Not a normal laugh. Something about it sounded empty, almost broken. Nam slowly turned his head, just enough to glance toward the back seat again. Her hair still covered her face, but he could feel her attention on him, watching, studying him. Then she whispered something that made Nam's stomach drop. "Then it's already too late." Nam felt a chill crawl down his spine. Too late for what? For several seconds, she didn't answer. Then, very slowly, she lifted her head. Her hair parted just enough for Nam to see her face. And when he did, every muscle in his body locked with terror. Because where her eyes should have been, there was nothing. Only 2 dark, empty holes staring back at him. Chapter 6. The Woman's Story. Nam's body froze. For a moment, his brain refused to process what he had just seen. The woman's face remained partially hidden behind strands of dark hair. But the brief glimpse had been enough. Where her eyes should have been, there had only been hollow darkness, deep, empty sockets that seemed to swallow the faint light inside the taxi. Nam quickly turned back to face the front. His hands were trembling. "This isn't real," he told himself. "You're just drunk, that's all." But the cold air inside the taxi felt too real. And the silence was becoming unbearable. The driver continued steering the vehicle through the fog as if nothing strange had happened. His posture was stiff, almost mechanical, both hands fixed on the steering wheel. Nam swallowed and forced himself to speak. What happened to your eyes?" For several seconds, the woman didn't respond. The taxi rolled across another long stretch of empty road. Then she finally spoke again. Her voice sounded calm, strangely calm. "I used to see them," she said softly. "See who?" "The passengers." Nam slowly glanced toward the rearview mirror again, even though a part of him didn't want to. He could see the back seat. The woman sat there quietly, her pale hands resting on her lap, her head tilted slightly forward. "I got into this taxi 3 years ago," she continued. "It was late. I had just finished work." Her voice sounded distant, like someone remembering a dream. The driver didn't talk much. Just like this one. Nam felt the hair on his arms rise. "You mean, this same taxi?" The woman gave a slow nod. "Yes." Nam's throat tightened. "What happened?" The woman remained silent for a moment. Outside, the fog grew thicker. The taxi seemed to be driving deeper into it, as if the world beyond the headlights had disappeared completely. Then she answered, "We never reached my destination." Nam felt his stomach twist. "Why not?" The woman slowly raised one hand and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Just enough to reveal the empty darkness where her eyes once were. Her lips curled into a faint, sorrowful smile. Because the taxi crashed. Nam's heart skipped a beat. Crashed? Yes. Her voice remained calm. There was another car. Someone driving too fast. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then she added quietly, "I died instantly." The words hung in the air like a cold shadow. Nam felt his chest tighten. That's impossible," he whispered. "If you died, then how are you?" The woman leaned slightly forward and whispered near his ear, "Because I never left the taxi."
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The Driver Who Should Be Dead. Nam felt his blood run cold. The woman's whisper lingered in the air beside his ear like a freezing breath. "I never left the taxi." His chest tightened as panic slowly began to rise inside him. "No," Nam muttered under his breath. "That's not possible." He shook his head, trying desperately to reject what he had just heard. Ghost stories. Urban legends. Late-night imagination. That was all this had to be. Nam forced himself to look forward again, focusing on the driver. "Hey," he said nervously. "Can you just take me back to the main road?" No response. The driver kept his eyes fixed on the fog-covered road ahead. The taxi continued moving. Faster now. Nam's voice grew sharper. "Did you hear me?" Still nothing. A strange tension filled the inside of the car, thick and suffocating. Then suddenly, the driver spoke. 3 years ago. His voice was low and dry. Nam froze. The driver continued slowly. On a rainy night, around 3:17 in the morning, Nam's heartbeat began to pound harder. The woman in the back seat remained silent. Another car ran a red light. The driver said. It hit the taxi at full speed. Nam felt his stomach twist. That accident, Nam whispered. Yes, the driver replied. For the first time since Nam entered the taxi. The driver slowly turned his head. Not fully. Just enough for Nam to see part of his face. The pale gray skin. The deep scar stretching across his cheek. And the lifeless expression in his eyes. Nam's breath caught in his throat. I remember you, the driver said quietly. The words struck Nam like a shock. What? You were the one driving the other car. Nam stared at him, unable to speak. His mind searched frantically through old memories. Rain. Headlights. A loud crash. The sound of breaking glass. It had happened years ago. A terrible accident he had tried to forget. The police had told him the taxi driver and passenger had died instantly. Nam had never seen their faces. Never attended any funeral. He had simply tried to move on with his life. But now, the driver's hollow eyes met his. You left the scene, the driver continued calmly. You never even knew who you killed. Nam's hands began to shake violently. That's not true. I didn't know. The driver turned his head forward again. The taxi continued deeper into the fog. And the woman behind Nam slowly whispered. Now you know. Chapter 8. The night of the accident. Nam's mind spun violently. The driver's words echoed again and again inside his head. You were the one driving the other car. His breathing became shallow. No, that can't be right. Nam whispered, his voice trembling. But deep inside, something began to stir, a memory he had buried for years. Outside the taxi, the fog thickened until it swallowed everything beyond the headlights. The road seemed endless, stretching forward into an empty gray void. Nam stared at his shaking hands. Fragments of the past began to surface. A stormy night. Rain pounding against the windshield. The wipers moving back and forth, barely keeping the glass clear. Nam had been driving too fast. He remembered that much. He had just left a party. Just like tonight, the roads were wet, and the city streets were almost empty. Then, headlights. A taxi approaching the intersection. The traffic light. Red. But Nam hadn't slowed down. The memory hit him like a punch to the chest. I tried to brake, he muttered weakly. The driver's voice interrupted him. You were too late. Nam closed his eyes tightly. The sound returned in his memory, the violent screech of tires against wet asphalt. Then the crash. Metal twisting. Glass exploding. The taxi spinning across the intersection like a broken toy. Nam's car had slammed into a lamppost moments later. Everything after that had been chaos. Police sirens. Shouting. Flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the rain-soaked pavement. Someone had pulled Nam out of the car. He had been bleeding, but still alive. He remembered asking the officer what happened to the other vehicle. The officer had hesitated before answering. A taxi, he had said. There were 2 people inside. Nam slowly opened his eyes. His chest felt heavy. They told me, both of you died. Nam whispered. The taxi driver let out a quiet breath. We did. Silence filled the car. The woman in the back seat spoke softly. My body was found in the wreckage. Her voice was distant, almost gentle. The driver died before the ambulance arrived. Nam felt the weight of guilt pressing down on him. I didn't know, he said quietly. You went home, the driver replied. You continued your life. The taxi drove on through the fog. And we stayed here. Nam looked toward the windshield. The road ahead looked wrong now. The fog seemed darker, deeper, almost like a tunnel swallowing the car. Then the driver added one final sentence. A sentence that made Nam's heart freeze. And tonight, you finally came back to us.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. A Ride That Never Ends. Nam's heart pounded violently in his chest. The driver's final words echoed in his mind like a sentence that could never be undone. You finally came back to us. The taxi continued moving through the endless fog. Nam leaned forward suddenly. Stop the car. The driver didn't react. Nam's voice rose, panic creeping into every word. I said stop the car. Still nothing. The driver's hands remained firmly on the steering wheel, guiding the vehicle down the empty road as if he hadn't heard a thing. Nam grabbed the door handle beside him. Locked. He pulled harder. The handle refused to move. What the hell is this? He shouted. Behind him, the woman let out a quiet sigh. It won't open. Nam turned toward her. What do you mean? Her pale face remained partially hidden behind her hair. This taxi doesn't let passengers leave, she said calmly. Not once the ride has begun. Nam shook his head frantically. That's insane. He tried the other door. Locked. He pressed the window button. Nothing happened. The windows wouldn't move. The car kept going. The fog outside thickened until it felt like they were driving inside a cloud of gray smoke. Then something strange caught Nam's attention. Shapes. Dark shapes standing along the road. At first he thought they were trees. But as the taxi passed them, Nam realized they were people. Or at least, they looked like people. Dozens of silent figures stood along the roadside, motionless in the fog. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. Some wore old clothes. Some looked injured. Some looked barely human. Nam's voice shook. Who are they? The woman in the back seat answered softly. Passengers. Nam's stomach twisted. Passengers? Yes. She tilted her head slightly. People who took the taxi after 3 in the morning. Nam stared through the window again. More figures appeared in the fog. Standing. Watching. Waiting. Why are they standing out there? Nam asked. The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. Because they got off the taxi. Nam frowned. But you said no one can leave. For a moment, the woman didn't respond. Then she slowly lifted her head again. Her empty eye sockets faced him. They didn't leave alive. Nam felt ice spread through his chest. The taxi continued down the road. Endless. Silent. like a ride that had no destination. Then the driver spoke again. "We're almost there." Nam's voice cracked. "Almost where?" The driver didn't answer. But ahead in the fog, a faint iron gate slowly emerged from the darkness. Chapter 10. The Fourth Passenger. The taxi slowed as the iron gate appeared through the fog. Nam leaned closer to the window, trying to see what lay ahead. The headlights illuminated the rusted bars of a tall gate standing in the middle of nowhere. Behind it stretched a narrow road disappearing into darkness. There were no buildings, no houses, only fog and silence. The taxi came to a complete stop. Nam's chest tightened. "Why are we stopping again?" he asked nervously. The driver didn't answer. The engine continued to hum quietly, vibrating through the worn seats. Nam glanced toward the rearview mirror. The woman behind him remained still, her pale hands folded in her lap. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly, a shape appeared in the fog outside. A young man. He stepped slowly toward the taxi, emerging from the mist as if he had been standing there the entire time. He looked normal. Completely normal. Jeans. A backpack. A tired expression on his face. He raised his hand and waved slightly. "Taxi." Nam's eyes widened. "No," he whispered. The driver unlocked the doors. The soft click echoed inside the silent vehicle. The young man opened the door and slid into the backseat beside the woman. "Thanks," he said, breathing out heavily. "I thought I'd never find a ride this late." He glanced around the taxi casually. "Man, this fog is crazy tonight." Nam turned around quickly. "Get out of the car." The young man frowned. "What? You need to leave, right now." The man laughed awkwardly. "Relax, dude, I just got in." "You don't understand," Nam said, his voice shaking. "This taxi." The doors suddenly locked again. The sharp sound made everyone jump. The young man pulled the handle. "Hey, what the hell?" It wouldn't open. Nam's stomach dropped. Slowly, the taxi began moving again. The young man looked toward the driver. Excuse me?" The doors stuck. The driver remained silent. The woman beside him tilted her head slightly, studying the new passenger. Then she spoke softly. "You got in after 3, didn't you?" The young man blinked. "Yeah, why?" The woman's lips curled into a faint, sad smile. "Then the ride has already begun." The young man laughed nervously. "Okay, what kind of weird joke is this?" Nam stared at him. His voice barely came out. "You're the 4th passenger." The young man frowned. "So?" Nam felt a deep dread growing inside his chest. Because the driver suddenly spoke again. Calm. Cold. 4 passengers. A long pause followed. Then he added quietly, "Now the taxi is full."
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. When the taxi began to change. The moment the driver finished speaking, an unnatural silence filled the taxi. "Now the taxi is full." The words hung in the air like a quiet sentence. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the temperature inside the car began to drop. Slowly. Subtly. At first, Nam thought he was imagining it. But soon he could see his own breath forming faint white clouds in front of his face. The young man beside the woman shivered. "Why is it so cold all of a sudden?" he muttered. No one answered. Outside the windows, the fog thickened even more. The world beyond the glass was now nothing but swirling gray darkness. It was as if the taxi had left the real world behind. Nam looked down at his hands. They were trembling. A strange smell began to spread inside the car. It was faint at first, but quickly became stronger. Wet earth, rotting leaves, and something worse. Something that smelled like soil freshly dug from a grave. "What is that smell?" the young man asked, covering his nose. Nam glanced down toward the floor, and his heart nearly stopped. The black carpet beneath their feet was no longer dry. Dark mud slowly spread across it. Thick, sticky, as if the taxi had been driving through a cemetery after heavy rain. "Hey, what the hell?" the young man said, lifting his shoes. His sneakers were already covered in damp dirt. The mud continued spreading across the floor, creeping slowly toward the seats like something alive. Nam looked toward the windows again. Something else had changed. The glass had begun to fog from the inside. At first it was just a thin layer of mist. But soon shapes started forming within it. Handprints. Dozens of them. Small ones. Large ones. Pressed against the inside of the windows as if invisible passengers were trying to push their way out. The young man noticed them too. "Are those hands?" Nam's voice barely came out. "Yes." The young man's face turned pale. "That's not funny." Behind them, the woman suddenly began to laugh. A quiet, hollow sound that echoed through the freezing air inside the taxi. The young man turned toward her. "What's so funny?" The woman slowly raised her head. Her empty eye sockets stared straight ahead. "You can see them now," she whispered. "See who?" the young man asked nervously. The woman's voice dropped to a soft whisper. "The others." The taxi continued moving forward. And outside the windows, more shadowy figures began to appear in the fog, walking silently alongside the car. Chapter 12. The Truth of the Ride. The shadowy figures outside the taxi continued walking alongside the car. At first they moved slowly, their shapes barely visible through the thick fog. But as the taxi drove forward, more of them began to appear. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. They walked silently on both sides of the road, their pale forms drifting through the mist like lost spirits. The young man pressed his face closer to the window. "Who are they?" he whispered. None of the figures outside looked alive. Their bodies moved stiffly. Their heads hung low. Some limped. Some dragged their feet along the ground. Others simply floated through the fog as if gravity no longer mattered. Nam felt his chest tighten. He didn't want to look anymore. But his eyes refused to turn away. "They're watching us," the young man said nervously. "Yes," the woman replied quietly. "They always do." The young man turned toward her. "What do you mean always?" The woman slowly folded her pale hands together. "They're waiting." "For what?" he asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "For the taxi to arrive." A chill ran through Nam's body. Outside the window, one of the figures slowly lifted its head. Its face was pale and hollow. Its mouth opened silently as the taxi passed. Nam turned away quickly. "I don't understand any of this," the young man said. His voice trembled now. "This has to be some kind of nightmare." The driver finally spoke again. "No." His voice was calm. "This is the truth." The young man stared at him. "What truth?" The taxi drove deeper into the fog as the driver continued. "This taxi does not carry the living." The young man laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous." But the driver didn't react. Instead, he continued speaking in the same quiet tone. "It carries the ones who don't yet understand they're already dead." The words froze the air inside the taxi. The young man shook his head immediately. "No, that's impossible." Nam felt a deep dread rising in his chest. Because he remembered what the woman had said earlier. "I never left the taxi." The young man looked toward Nam. "Don't listen to this crazy stuff." Nam couldn't answer. He simply stared at his own hands. Something was wrong. Very wrong. His skin looked pale. Almost transparent. The young man noticed it too. "Dude, your hands?" Nam slowly lifted them. The dim light inside the taxi passed through his fingers. Like thin glass. The driver's voice came from the front seat. "Calm. Cold. You died 3 years ago." Nam felt the world tilt. "That's not true," he whispered weakly. "You were never rescued from the river." The driver continued. "The police only found your car." Nam's heart pounded violently. The memory returned. The crash. The spinning car. The cold water. Nam looked up slowly. "But, I've been living my life." The driver gave a quiet reply. "You've only been wandering." The taxi continued forward. And far ahead in the fog, a massive gate slowly began to appear.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The Memory Beneath the Water. Nam stared at his hands in horror. The dim light inside the taxi passed through his fingers like pale smoke. They no longer looked solid. They looked fragile, unreal. "No," he whispered. His voice sounded distant, even to his own ears. "This isn't possible." The young man beside him leaned closer. His face filled with confusion and fear. "What do you mean you died 3 years ago?" he asked. Nam didn't answer. His mind was already slipping back into the past. Back to the night of the accident. The memory returned with terrifying clarity. Rain poured from the sky like a curtain of silver needles. The road had been slick and empty. The traffic lights glowing faintly through the storm. Nam had been driving too fast. Much too fast. Then he remembered the moment everything changed. The red light. The taxi entering the intersection. The violent crash. Metal twisting. Glass exploding. Nam's car had spun wildly across the wet road before slamming through the metal barrier along the river. The railing had shattered. His car had plunged straight into the dark water below. Nam could feel it again now. The freezing river surrounding him. The water rushing inside the car. His seatbelt locked. His chest burning as he struggled to breathe. Nam remembered pounding against the window. Screaming for help. But no one had heard him. The river swallowed everything. Slowly, his strength faded. The last thing he remembered was the dim glow of the streetlights above the surface of the water, growing farther and farther away. Nam's body trembled. "I drowned," he whispered. The driver nodded slightly. "Yes." The woman in the back seat spoke gently. "None of us left that night." The young man stared at them in disbelief. "This is insane," he said. "I'm alive. I was just walking home from work." Nam slowly turned toward him. "What time did you get into the taxi?" The young man frowned. "I don't know, around 3. Nam felt a heavy silence fall over the car. The driver spoke again. 3 in the morning. The hour when the lost souls begin to wander. Outside the windows, the fog thickened again. And ahead of them, the enormous iron gate slowly creaked open. Chapter 14. The Gate of the Forgotten. The iron gate slowly creaked open. The sound echoed through the fog like the groan of something ancient waking from a long sleep. Nam stared through the windshield. Beyond the gate stretched a wide path covered in pale mist. On both sides stood rows of crooked trees whose branches twisted toward the sky like skeletal hands. The place felt wrong. Not empty, but crowded in a way that couldn't be seen clearly. The taxi rolled forward. As soon as the car passed through the gate, the air outside seemed to change. The fog thickened into something heavier, almost like smoke rising from the ground. Nam looked out the window. At first, he saw only shadows. Then the shapes became clearer. Figures. Hundreds of them. They stood along the path, silent and motionless. Some wore old clothes from decades ago. Others looked like they had stepped out of recent times. Their faces were pale, their eyes dull, their bodies slightly transparent. They were all watching the taxi, watching the passengers inside. The young man's breathing became uneven. What is this place?" No one answered. The driver kept the taxi moving slowly down the path. The headlights passed over the silent crowd, revealing more and more figures standing in the fog. Some looked injured. Some looked lost. Some looked as if they had been waiting for a very long time. Nam felt a cold understanding settle in his chest. "These are the lost souls," he whispered. The woman nodded quietly. "Yes. They are the ones who never found their way." The taxi continued forward until it reached the center of a large clearing. Then the engine shut off. The sudden silence felt deafening. The driver turned slightly in his seat. "For 3 years," he said calmly, "this taxi has searched the roads after 3 in the morning." Nam swallowed. "Searching for what?" The driver's pale eyes met his. "For the passengers who never accepted their death." The young man shook his head violently. "No, I'm alive. I'm not dead." The driver didn't argue. Instead, he simply said, "Step outside." The doors unlocked with a loud click. The young man grabbed the handle and pushed the door open. Cold fog poured into the taxi. He stepped out first. The crowd of silent figures slowly turned toward him. Nam hesitated. Then he opened his door as well. The moment his foot touched the ground, a strange calm filled his body. As if something inside him finally understood the truth. Behind them, the taxi engine started again. Nam turned around just in time to see the driver close the door. The taxi slowly pulled away into the fog, leaving them standing among the waiting souls. And as the car disappeared into the darkness, Nam heard the driver's voice one last time. Another ride begins soon. Because somewhere in the city, it was almost 3 in the morning again.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Next Passenger. The taxi disappeared into the fog. Its red taillights slowly faded until they became 2 tiny glowing dots, and then vanished completely. Nam stood in the cold mist, surrounded by the silent figures. For the first time since the ride began, everything felt strangely calm. The heavy weight in his chest was gone. The fear that had gripped him inside the taxi slowly faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. He looked down at his hands again. They were almost transparent now, like faint shadows made of light. The woman who had been sitting behind him in the taxi stepped closer. Her movements were slow and gentle. "You remember everything now," she said softly. Nam nodded. Yes. The memories no longer felt distant. They were clear. The accident, the river, the darkness beneath the water, and the moment his life had quietly ended. The young man stood nearby, still shaking his head in disbelief. "No," he muttered. "This isn't real." Nam looked at him with quiet sympathy. "I said the same thing." The woman placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Most of us do." The fog slowly drifted across the clearing. The crowd of silent souls remained where they were, watching the empty road beyond the gate. Waiting. Nam followed their gaze. Beyond the iron gate, the faint outline of the city could be seen in the distance. Street lights. Buildings. The living world continuing as if nothing had ever happened. Nam felt a strange pull inside him. Not fear. Not sadness. Just acceptance. "Will the taxi come back?" he asked. The woman nodded slowly. "Yes. It always does." Nam looked toward the road again. Far away, somewhere beyond the fog, a pair of headlights slowly appeared. The taxi was already returning to the city. Back to the empty streets. Back to the lonely passengers standing under street lights after 3 in the morning. Somewhere in the city, a tired man would soon step out of a bar. Or a late worker would walk down a quiet road. Or someone would stand alone on a corner, checking their phone for a ride home. And when the old taxi stopped beside them, they would open the door. They would climb inside. Because they wouldn't know the rule. The rule that Nam now understood too late. Never take a taxi after 3 in the morning. Because some taxis are not meant for the living. So if you ever find yourself standing alone on a quiet street late at night, and an old taxi suddenly stops beside you, take a moment before opening that door. Look at the clock. If it's after 3 in the morning, it might not be a ride home. It might be a ride you'll never return from. And remember the rule. Never take a taxi after 3 a.m. Ghost.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.